everybody, welcome to the Morgan Ortagus Show. I so appreciate you watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Get involved with the Morgan Ortagus Show. I'm very excited today. I am in the Capitol, as you can see, beautiful. His address to a joint session of Congress, and I'm here with Congressman Tom Emmer. He's the Republican whip. He's from the great state of Minnesota. We're going to talk to him about that address. We're going to talk to him about Biden's speech and everything going on around the world from a national security and American foreign policy perspective. So thank you for tuning in to the Morgan Ortagus Show. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Morgan Ortagus Show. I'm incredibly excited to be in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol. It's been a crazy week. There's like 20 news cycles in one, but I am here with Congressman Tom Emmer. He's in leadership. He's the whip here on the Republican side. We're going to go into a lot of national security discussions, and luckily we have the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, here yesterday. You and I both attended the speech. What are your takeaways?
You know, he's I mean, when we met beforehand, I just told him, you are the most influential, consequential leader that we have actually in charge around the world right now. And then he proceeded to prove why he's so good.
Yeah.
He got in front of Congress and he said, one, this is what happened. This is what we're responding to. Murder, rape, you know, children being murdered in front of their parents, parents being murdered in front of their children. And you've got terrorists who their sole commitment is to destroy Israel and kill Jews. And they're not going to stop until they finish what they have set out to do. So he tried to, I thought he did a great job of framing, this is why this started. Right. Then he went into the next phase, Morgan, where he talked about, this is how we're doing it. Civilian falsehood. Right. In fact, we are doing more to protect civilians than anyone has ever done in a military conflict in the history of the world, according to the West Point expert that he referred to. So he made it very clear that they're doing what they have to do. The way they're doing it is to protect civilians. And the problem is Hamas, and he quoted the Hamas leader that said, women and children make great human shields. Hamas is the problem. It is not Israel. And then I thought it was great. The third thing, again, he said, this is what causes it. This is what we're doing about it. And he finished by saying, this is why it's important to you. Yeah. We are in this together.
He is a brilliant politician. Oh. I mean, when I was watching him give the speech, I thought there is just, and you could agree or disagree with him, but just the way his oratory skills, the way he gives a speech, Bibi Netanyahu is like none other. I was at the speech. You were down on the floor. I was upstairs with all the guests. I was actually sitting in the row in front of two families of American hostages. And I promised them, and we're going to do that again in this interview, I continue to do this since I met them in January of this year when I was in Israel. But I always promised them that I'm going to bring up the fact that we still have 5 Americans that are held hostage by a terrorist organization in Gaza behind enemy lines almost 10 months later. I think it's important that we remember that. And you know, it was, as a parent, I'm a parent, you're a parent, it was very difficult to sit in front of them because I kept thinking they are living my worst nightmare. Now, I hope that we are days and weeks away from getting them back. I hope and pray that they are alive. Do you think the Biden administration, the Harris administration, have they done enough to get these Americans home?
Absolutely not. I mean, this is the weakest. I thought there was nobody weaker than Jimmy Carter. This is the absolute weakest. We instead of follow, wink and blink and nod, these people that they have going over there and negotiating what? I mean, Bibi, I thought, was gracious yesterday by saying, you know, really appreciate his efforts to negotiate. But when it comes to the hostages, I told you before we started this morning, you take Americans, that is an act of war. That requires an immediate and very clear response, and you need to retrieve those hostages. You don't let them languish for 10 months. That's not why we have a central government. The government is created to protect you and me and our families from these terrible people that are out there, and they have done nothing. All they do is talk.
You know, I thought President Trump at the convention last week was very clear about this when he spoke about it. I mean, he essentially put Hamas, put Iran, put everybody on notice that these American hostages better come home. And I can tell you, having worked for him and Secretary Mike Pompeo, they do not want to face a Trump administration if these hostages are not home.
Morgan, look, you guys showed how this is handled. You took care of ISIS. That was a problem that Obama could not get his hands around. Now you've got all these Obamaites back in the office. Clearly, Harris must be the one that's in charge, because we've seen Joe Biden, right? He doesn't have much going on upstairs. Obama let ISIS, he just didn't control it. Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo, that administration came in and had a plan and dealt with it and effectively ended ISIS, right? Only to see this administration come back and literally tear down all the walls, just like our southern border, and just allow people to run crazy again.
One of the things that was shocking and disturbing yesterday after the Bibi Netanyahu speech is what happened here in the Capitol. And the images are almost too much to believe. But there were the burning of American flags. In Union Station, which is right here near the Capitol, we saw literal pro-Hamas protesters. Again, pro-Hamas being pro-terror organization protesters, taking down the American flag, burning it, putting up Hamas or Palestinian flags. I saw a video of a Capitol police officer literally being dragged. What we saw yesterday, I thought, was one of the most shameful things that I've seen happen. How did you respond to the pro-Hamas protesters yesterday after the Bibi speech?
Well, first off, I was stuck here in the Capitol all day, not just with Bibi's speech, but we were still doing appropriations bills, and so I was walled off from all of that activity until I started to see it when I got back and turned the TV on last night and watching it this morning. And with my age, this is circa 1979, only it was in Tehran. It wasn't here on our homeland. I was seeing the same thing that we used to see outside the American embassy in Tehran back in 1979 when it all went bad, which Bibi actually referred to in his speech. It's unacceptable. I ask myself where the FBI is investigating who these people are and whether they're a danger to this country, which clearly they are.
Well, the U.S. government, the DNI, has said that some of these protests are being paid for by the Iranians.
Exactly. So isn't that why we have the FBI? And they're so busy doing everything but that job, apparently, that this is being allowed to run wild. This is why, by the way, Americans, it doesn't matter what your party persuasion is. This is why I believe they will re-elect Donald Trump in November, because we just can't have this.
You know, yesterday I had the privilege. Molinaro, I believe it's how you... Molinaro, thank you, who is the chair of the China Committee, which I think is just one of the best things.
No, Molinaro.
Molinaro,
Yes.
All right, we got it
John
right.
Molinaro from Michigan.
He is doing fantastic work on the Select Committee on China, a bipartisan committee. I think this is one of the best things out of this Congress. We know that China is the pacing threat. And then, of course, last night, there's so much news. It's very hard to get to it all. But last night, again, we're having this interview on Thursday. So on Wednesday night, President Biden, of course, spoke to the nation. The address was supposed to be about why he wasn't running for re-election. I never really heard why, but that's for another day. One of the things we did see is, for the first time, Russian and Chinese bombers flying together and had to be intercepted by NORAD. I'm just going to let you comment on that, because I can't believe that happened. That was such a clear sign, I think, from China and Russia right before President Biden spoke.
If people don't think that we are in a conflict right now, they're not paying attention. China has been incredibly aggressive. Russia has been unchecked, except by the Ukrainians and the support the Ukrainians have received. But Putin seems to be getting more bold with his stuff. And it's all because nobody's dealing with Iran, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
You have to deal with Iran so these bad actors understand there will be consequences, and we just aren't doing it. Think about this for a second. This place is so divided with Republicans and Democrats and all the rest of it. You had 54 members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee go into a top secret classified briefing on something called TikTok, with the dangers that are being posed by TikTok. That 54-member committee came out of the classified briefing and voted 54-0 to do something about TikTok like that. Unfortunately, with some of the top secret classified information, in your position with the Trump White House, you would be privy to some of that because you're addressing policy and trying to build strategy. Not everybody here is privy to that, and certainly the American public's not privy to that, but that should be one of those smoke signals that tells you this is a big problem, and we recognize that here, and we need to be very clear on what the response is to put this down.
One of the things, that I think is, one more thing on Biden's speech, one of the things that I thought was perplexing, a line in his speech, I'm not going to quote it, verbatim, but essentially he said that he was the first president in modern history, blah, 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 where the United States was not engaged, U.S. troops were not engaged in a war anywhere around the world. And I think maybe whoever wrote the speech forgot to get a briefing on the Red Sea. And what our U.S. Navy is doing there, the amount of TLAMs that we're using to go after Houthis, the Houthis. We just saw, I could go through example after example after example. In the last week, we just saw the Houthis get this close to bombing the American Embassy branch office in Tel Aviv. So while we may not have a declared war, we are clearly at war. Our U.S. military is at war. What are your thoughts on the president making that statement?
Well, first off, my view of the so-called speech last night, it's you supposedly you have COVID. Did that stop you from getting in front of a camera 4 days ago and telling America what it is you're doing and why? It was very sad to me last night because literally it looked like a hostage video after he had been knifed in the chest by Obama and pushed over the cliff by Pelosi. You've got people that he built relationships with and trusted for 50 years that literally took him out of this thing. And you could tell if you were watching last night, he didn't want to go. This is not how he wanted this thing to go. And they pushed him out clearly. And then he started gaslighting the American public on everything again. It's inflation. We've got the best economy ever. He ignores these people that are dealing with 20% inflation in 3.5 years under his failed policies. And it was great. I did an interview with ABC last night, and they said, well, let's be clear. Inflation has come down. And it's like, this is your problem. You keep telling the American public that is spending $1,000 more on average a month for what they were paying for last time, and their wages have not kept up. Have they gone up? Yes, but the problem is your inflation and the cost of living has gone up so much.
And it's not like food inflation at the grocery store has gone down.
No, that's right. And by the way, these poor people are running up a down escalator that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are speeding up by the day, and they're crazy people around him. So, and then the border. He was gaslighting us on the border last night. Oh, we have less people coming across the border now than we did in the previous administration. Come on, Joe. Either you have completely lost your marbles or you are lying to the American public. Kamala Harris was supposed to be in charge of that, and it's the same thing on this. I'm not in any conflicts. I've just caused conflicts everywhere around the world because I won't be a leader. The U.S. has pulled back, and look what's happened. You've got bad actors all over the world taking advantage of it.
Well, you represent a really important swing state. By the time everybody listens to this interview on Sunday and next week, former President Trump and J.D. Vance, his vice presidential pick, who was just on the Morgan Ortagus show, will be in your home state for a rally. So just sort of preview to me what you think will resonate with voters in your state? And do Republicans have a chance of winning it in November?
That's a great question. Minnesota hasn't voted for a Republican presidential candidate in 50 years. 1972 was the last time.
Wow.
We have the distinct dishonor of being the only state that did not vote for Ronald Reagan in 1984.
That's right.
It's actually sad, but Donald Trump is the guy that can change that. In 2016, he came within 1.5 points of winning Minnesota. 2020, let's forget that for this discussion, because we all have our opinions about 2020. Right now, there are pre-debate, pre-convention, pre-assassination attempt polls that show Donald Trump down by 2 to 4 points or up by as many as 5 points in Minnesota, depending on where they're doing the polling. Donald Trump has a real opportunity to win Minnesota. I tell people for years, JD asked me this at the convention, he said, is that real? And I said, JD, I picked elite youth hockey teams for years. And whenever you got to the last 3 spots on the team, you had 6 kids that you were looking at. We called those the bubble kids. Minnesota is a bubble state when it comes to, or one of the bubble kids when it comes to this election. And I think that we are going to end up in that mix, and we are going to make a difference in this election.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman Emmer. Really appreciate you being on the Morgan Ortagus Show and going through all these national security challenges with us. Most importantly, you have a family of military service, and we're just so grateful for your children and for your family service.
Well, thanks for yours, Morgan. I learned a bunch this morning before we started. That's awesome.
Thank you. Well, that's a wrap, my friends. Always good to be here in Washington, D.C. with great leaders like Congressman Tom Emmer. Again, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Continue to watch The Morgan Ortagus Show on YouTube, Rumble, X, Instagram, Facebook, however you're watching this. I'm just glad you're watching it. We'll be back soon with other newsmaker interviews of the day.